When my son told me I wouldn't be welcome for Christmas, I smiled and made a call. Not the kind of call you might think. Not one filled with anger or tears. Not the desperate voice of a man begging to be included. It was calm, measured, final. But let me take you back to the moment just before that smile. I had gone to visit my son Michael at the house I helped him buy. Not just helped, I funded that house. 20 years of savings, pension withdrawals, selling my truck, and downsizing my own life into a cramped one-bedroom unit. Also, my only child could raise his family with more space, more comfort, more everything. And I never asked for anything in return. Just to be part of the family. To have a seat at the table I helped set. That day, as I stepped into the house, the familiar smell of pine and cinnamon hit me. Isabella must have already put up the artificial tree, flawlessly color-coordinated with white and gold. The fireplace flickered, music played low in the background, and the warmth of the house was almost overwhelming. Not physically, emotionally. It was the kind of warmth I used to come home to when Maria was still alive. God, she would have loved this house. She would have fussed over the garlands, wrapped presents days in advance, and forced me to wear those ridiculous reindeer socks with bells. It was in her nature, giving, warm, full of light. And when cancer took her, I did what I thought was right. I transferred all that devotion into our son. Maria and I had always said, he's our legacy. So I worked extra shifts. I never remarried. I skipped vacations, tightened my belt, and when Michael came to me years ago, wide-eyed with a business plan in one hand and a mortgage agreement in the other, I said yes. Of course I did. What father wouldn't? But that day, standing in that house, the one with high ceilings, French doors and a staircase that curled like a ribbon, I felt like a guest at someone else's success story. Michael hugged me stiffly. Isabella nodded from across the room, barely glancing up from her tablet. There were no grandkids running up to greet me. No hot cocoa. No laughter. Just the faint sound of ceramic clinking and the hollow thud of footsteps above. I followed Michael into the kitchen, admiring the marble countertops, the new chandelier, the state-of-the-art fridge that probably cost more than my entire apartment. He cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, "I need to talk to you about Christmas." I already knew. Isabella had barely looked at me the last few visits, and the tension in the air was always just thick enough to slice with a steak knife. Still, I nodded. "Sure, what's up?" He didn't sit down. He leaned against the counter, like he was about to give a performance he had rehearsed all week. "Isabella's parents are flying in from Connecticut," he began. "They haven't seen the kids in a while, and they have their own traditions." Their own traditions. I let those words hang in the air. He went on, words tripping over themselves in a rush of guilt-drenched justification. "They're old school, they're not used to loud holidays. You know, the dancing, the music, the food." He meant our food. My food. Maria's food. "You mean they don't like Pernil?" I asked, one eyebrow raised. He looked away. "It's not just the food, Dad. It's everything. The music, the stories, the language sometimes. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable, I repeated almost to myself. I wanted to ask him when I had become the discomfort, when I had stopped being family and started being a cultural inconvenience. He took a breath. "We'll do something together in January," he offered weakly. "Maybe after New Year's. Just us. Just us. Like leftovers." And that's when I smiled. It wasn't sarcastic. It wasn't cruel. It was the smile of a man who had finally seen something clearly. "Okay," I said, "thanks for telling me." And then I pulled out my phone and made the call. Not to yell, not to threaten, not to cry, just one call to the bank. I'd been paying off their mortgage for over a year through automated transfers. Quietly, every month. Like clockwork. That clock just stopped. I drove home that night in silence. No music, no radio. Just the hum of the tires and the sudden echo of my own thoughts. I remembered the day we closed on that house. Michael had tears in his eyes. He hugged me and said, "You're the best, Dad. I'll never forget this." But they did forget. They forgot the 12-hour shifts I worked unloading crates at the docks after Maria passed. They forgot how I missed her funeral reception because I had to return to work the same night. They forgot the holidays I spent alone, with a single empanada and a candle lit beside her photo. They forgot that when Michael's business almost collapsed during the pandemic, it was my emergency fund that kept his family afloat. I sacrificed warmth, comfort, health, even pride, so that they could live a life I never had. And now, I was told there wasn't room at the table, because I didn't fit the aesthetic, because they had their own traditions. I parked the car, sat in the dark, and let the weight of it settle, but not as a victim, not anymore. That moment, the moment I smiled, it wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of boundaries, of clarity, of justice. Christmas was still weeks away, and I had plans. The silence in my apartment was thick. After that conversation with Michael, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't touch the radio. I just sat in the armchair Maria once loved, her quilt still folded neatly over the backrest, and stared at nothing. I wasn't angry yet, not fully. I was still somewhere between confusion and heartbreak. I thought maybe, just maybe, Michael would call back. Say he didn't mean it, that Isabella was having a moment and he'd talk to her, that he couldn't imagine Christmas morning without his father in the house, without me making café con leche before dawn, humming the same corny songs Maria used to play when she was alive. But the call didn't come. Instead, it was Isabella. My phone lit up with her name, Isabella Reyes Flores, like she'd always insisted people write it on invitations and mail. The hyphenated Reyes Flores, as if she needed to anchor herself to Michael's name to keep from drifting too far from his importance. I answered. I shouldn't have. Her voice slithered through the line with that polished, fake smile tone she always used when she wanted something. "Dennis," she said. "Hi, I wanted to talk to you before anything got weird." Weird? I stayed silent. She took my silence as permission. I think maybe Michael didn't explain it right. The thing is, this year my parents are flying in from Connecticut. They're very traditional, Dennis. They do Christmas a certain way. There's a certain standard. Still silent. My blood began to move slowly. She laughed, soft and patronizing. And honestly, they're not used to your, style of celebration. The food, the music, that whole, what do you call it, the midnight dinner thing? La Noche Buena, I said quietly. Yes, that, she said, like it was a foreign disease. They do things very classic. Turkey, champagne, fireplace, very minimal. Then came the knife. I just don't think it would be appropriate to mix traditions this year. It's not personal, Dennis. We just want to keep things elevated. Clean, simple. Elevated. As if what I brought to the table, what Maria built with her heart and hands and recipe book and endless love, was less than. As if my presence would muddy their whitewashed, sanitized, magazine-ready version of a Christmas celebration. I said nothing. She didn't stop. She never did. I mean, your tamales are cute, but they make the whole house smell like cumin and garlic for days. And the last time you brought that flan, well, my dad thought it looked like a jiggling organ on the table. She laughed again. We're just going for something a little more refined this year. It wasn't about the food. Not really. It was about what the food represented. My identity. Maria's memory. Our family's roots. Everything she couldn't control, and everything she wanted to erase. And then she said it. The sentence that turned the heat in my chest into something else entirely. Maybe next year you can do something at your place. Like your own little dinner or whatever. And if we're free, we'll swing by for a bit. My place. My little dinner. Swing by if they're free. I felt it. The slow rupture of something inside me. Not rage, not sadness. Something deeper. A quiet, permanent shift. I took a breath and in the calmest voice I've ever mustered, I said, Isabella, Do me a favor, and don't ever talk about my wife again. Not her food, not her culture, not our traditions. You married into this family, but you never once tried to understand it. And now you're erasing it." There was a pause. I don't think she expected me to speak. I continued. "You know what's funny? You're eating off plates I bought, sitting on chairs I paid for, in a house I helped you buy. And yet you talk to me like I'm some inconvenient piece of clutter." More silence. Then she snapped. "You're being dramatic, Dennis. I'm just trying to curate a certain atmosphere. You're the one making this toxic." I smiled to myself. The final smile. "I'm glad you called," I said. "You've helped me decide something." "What does that mean?" she asked. I ended the call without another word. That silence as the call dropped was different. It wasn't thick anymore, it wasn't sad. It was clean, sharp. I stood up, walked to my desk, and opened my laptop. I logged into the bank account that automatically paid Michael and Isabella's mortgage every month. I stared at the green button, Disable Autopay. My finger hovered for a moment. Then I clicked. That was the first thing I took back. My money, my silence, my shame. The second thing, well, that came next. Isabella's arrogance. 3 days after the call, the one where she spat on my memories like they were dust on marble, she had the gall to text me. "Dennis, could you please pick up my parents from the airport? Their flight lands at 3:40 p.m. on Friday. We're preparing the Christmas Eve dinner, so we're tied up. No, please join us. No, sorry for the misunderstanding. Just a demand, disguised in politeness so thin, it was practically see-through. It was the kind of message that didn't ask, it assigned. Like I was the help. Like I was the relic of a family she was trying to rebrand. She didn't call me Dad, not even Mr. Flores, just Dennis, no warmth, no hesitation. It reminded me of how when Maria was alive we'd host Christmas Eve every year. My wife would spend hours in the kitchen making empanadas from scratch, humming old songs while the house smelled of fried plantain and warm cinnamon. Michael used to sit at the table licking the bowl clean. Isabella never liked those holidays. She'd pick at the food, wrinkle her nose, ask if we had anything less oily. That memory burned now. And the idea of picking up her parents, those stiff-necked, designer scarf-wearing phantoms from Connecticut, wasn't just irritating, it was an insult wearing pearls. Dennis's power play, I texted her back. "Sure, I'll be there." Then I poured myself a glass of good bourbon and smiled. I had no intention of stepping 1 foot near that terminal. 3:40 p.m. on Friday came and went. While her parents were circling the arrival gate like confused doves, I was sitting in my backyard, under a sycamore tree, shelling peanuts and feeding the blue jays that Maria used to talk to. It was a crisp winter afternoon, the kind of afternoon where the silence feels like a warm coat. I didn't even look at my phone. I grilled a steak, medium rare, the way Michael used to like it. Funny how things change. I ate it alone, savoring every bite. Climax of Act 1. At 6:15 p.m., my doorbell rang, loud, repetitive, angry. Then came the banging, like I owed them something. I opened the door slowly. There they were. Michael, Isabella, her parents, all dressed like they'd just stepped out of a holiday catalog, but red in the face, sweaty from dragging their designer luggage up my driveway. "You didn't show up," Isabella shouted, pushing her way forward. "We were stranded at the airport for over 2 hours," her mother added, gasping like someone had stolen the air from her private jet. Dennis calmly stared at them. Michael looked embarrassed, but he said nothing. He stood behind his wife like a man watching his father's image crumble in real time. Or maybe he was finally realizing it had already crumbled and he'd never lifted a finger to stop it. "Dennis," Isabella hissed, "this isn't how family behaves. We were counting on you." I took a deep breath. "No," I said. "You were using me." They all blinked. This house, I gestured around, was built with my money, my sacrifice, and my wife's memory. And you, I turned to Isabella, have tried to erase both like they're stains on your fancy kitchen counter. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. You've made it clear I'm not welcome, so let me return the favor. You're not welcome here either. Silence. Then her father muttered something about entitlement, and I smiled again. Not the kind of smile you give friends, the kind you give when the air has finally cleared. Get off my porch, I said, with the peace of a man who has nothing left to explain. They left in stunned silence. I closed the door, locked it, and went back to my chair under the sycamore. Maria would have been proud. 3 days after the airport incident, Dennis woke up to the sound of a neighbor's knock. Not the friendly kind, the hesitant, confused kind, holding something behind their back. Hey, Dennis, you might want to see this. It was the Herald Review, the city's most read Sunday paper. Right there on the front page, under the community spotlight section, a local legacy, lost in bitterness, the sad decline of Dennis Flores, by Cody Jenkins. Dennis didn't need to read the whole thing to know who'd orchestrated it, but he read it anyway. Every sentence was a knife dipped in fake sympathy. Words like increasingly isolated, refuses to engage with his only family, and accusations of emotional instability. Cody had even included a quote, anonymous of course. It's heartbreaking. He was once a respected figure in our town, but since Maria passed, something in him broke. He's just not well anymore. The article was laced with lies, dressed up as concern. It hinted at dementia, suggested financial recklessness, claimed Dennis had refused to attend his own grandson's school play. There was even a reference to angry outbursts and police concern, none of which ever happened. The piece ended with a smug little paragraph. Sometimes, legacy isn't about what you build, but what you destroy before the end. Dennis's awakening. Dennis sat at the kitchen table, newspaper spread in front of him, fingers curled around a cold coffee mug. This wasn't just Isabella's doing. This was her husband, Cody Jenkins, the political golden boy, the man who always knew how to spin a story, charm a room, kiss a baby, and poison a name with a smile. Cody had been circling his life like a vulture for years, waiting for Dennis to grow old, grow tired, and step aside. But Dennis hadn't stepped. He'd stood. And now, this article was his punishment for refusing to bow. It wasn't just slander, it was erasure. And it hit him all at once. They wanted him gone. Not just out of the house, but out of the picture, out of memory. They were painting him as senile so they could claim power, rewrite history, and call it progress. That's when it happened. That quiet snap inside. Not loud, not angry, just sharp, clear, cold. Dennis folded the paper slowly, stood up, and walked to the window. He watched the wind move through the trees in his yard. The yard he'd trimmed for 20 years. The soil Maria once planted her tulips in. The land Cody and Isabella now saw as leverage. A strange calmness settled over him. If this was war, they'd just fired the first public shot. It would be the last one they fired unanswered. The morning after the article, Dennis did not pace. He did not fume. He moved with eerie stillness, like a man settling into his old bones not to rest, but to rise. He pulled a heavy brown box from the top shelf of his hallway closet. It was labeled, "Taxes Stuff," in Maria's handwriting. Underneath dusty folders and aging receipts lay the timeline of a life built on self-sacrifice. Dennis sat up at the dining table, now cleared of family photos, and began his work. This wasn't nostalgia, it was war strategy, and every document was a bullet. He laid out bank statements tracing every dollar he'd funneled into Michael and Isabella's home, from the down payment to the kitchen remodel Isabella bragged about on Instagram. Checks written to cover private school tuition for a grandson who now looked through him like glass. Medical receipts for Maria's final months, which he paid alone while Michael, couldn't get off work. Photographs of Christmases past, smiling faces around a table he'd built, meals he'd cooked, laughter Maria had made possible. Emails where Isabella begged for help with her startup pitch deck, which Dennis edited for her between hospital visits. Screenshots of her online posts, photoshopped portrayals of struggle, captions like, "Built from nothing," comments praising her self-made grit. He printed side-by-side comparisons, her claims versus reality. Every lie, every omission, every receipt from the truth they'd tried to erase. As the sun set, Dennis's dining room transformed into a war room, neatly labeled envelopes stacked by the fireplace, 12 of them, each with a guest's name, each with a full dossier. But the centerpiece wasn't the evidence. It was Maria's handwritten Christmas recipe card, framed, faded, with cinnamon stains on the corners. He placed it gently at the head of the table, where her chair used to be. The ghost of her presence gave him strength, not to retaliate with rage, but with remembrance. She had taught him dignity, and now he would wield it like a weapon. Final plan. Later that evening, Dennis made a phone call to a former neighbor who still kept tabs on the high society circle Isabella clawed her way into. "Is it true?" he asked. "Oh, it's true," she whispered. "She's hosting the Valencia Circle Christmas Eve dinner. 12 people, catered. Press likely to attend. Everyone who matters will be there." Dennis hung up and exhaled. He wasn't invited, but his story would be. Each envelope he prepared was addressed by hand, sealed with a crimson wax stamp, and tucked into a matching gold-trimmed folder. Not anonymous, not vague. From Dennis Flores. No signature needed. Just facts, just evidence. Just decades of generosity documented with quiet, surgical precision. 12 guests, 12 truths. Delivered like gospel on Christmas Eve. Not out of spite, but so when they raised their wine glasses and toasted Isabella's curated illusion of elegance, they do so with the weight of the truth sitting on their laps. He wasn't destroying their story. He was simply restoring his. The Valencia Circle home was dressed to impress. Soft jazz drifting from invisible speakers, imported garlands wrapped around gold stair railings, and the scent of truffle oil clinging to the air like a price tag. 12 guests, all carefully selected by Isabella, sat around a long mahogany table lit with candles so tall they blurred faces into shadows. Laughter buzzed like champagne foam, artificial, over-polished, perfectly on cue, until the front door opened, and Dennis Flores walked in. No knocking, no invitation, just presence. He wore his old navy blue blazer, the one Maria used to press every Easter. It was slightly frayed at the elbows, but unmistakably dignified. He carried a simple leather satchel, the kind that belonged to a man who still believed documents mattered more than drama. The room fell into stunned silence. "Dennis?" Isabella's voice cracked like glass under pressure. "What the hell?" He held up a hand. Calm, still, unshaken. "I won't be long." He walked to the table slowly, like he owned it, because once he kind of did. Each guest looked at him like he didn't belong. He noticed. He didn't care. From his bag, he pulled 12 golden-trimmed folders and placed them in front of each guest one by one with surgical precision. "You don't know me," he said quietly, "but you've eaten at my table, worn the clothes I helped pay for, and repeated lies I never got the chance to correct." Gasps rose like steam. Isabella's face went pale. Inside each folder was a story. Bank receipts, photos, tuition invoices, before and after shots of renovations he'd paid for. Side-by-side comparisons of social media lies versus cold, undeniable fact. Racist text messages between Cody and Catherine, forwarded anonymously to Dennis months earlier. Maria's medical bills, the will she wrote before she died, naming Dennis as the sole moral guardian of the family she once held together. He looked directly at a woman seated at the far end, Veronica Leclerc, society columnist for the Valencia Herald. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the evidence. Her mouth slowly opened, then shut. She said nothing. "Let me be clear," Dennis said louder now. This isn't revenge, it's clarity. So the next time someone tells you I'm senile or bitter or beneath them, remember what's in your hands. Isabella stood, rattled and red-faced. This is insane. He's an old man who's angry we moved on. No, interrupted a silver-haired gentleman. This is meticulous and deeply troubling. Those texts, someone else murmured, looking directly at Cody. Jesus. Cody leaned forward, voice strained. You people don't understand the context. Dennis has always been dramatic. This is just bitterness. Is that why you called him a low-income liability in that email? Another guest asked, holding up a printed screenshot. Silence. Catherine turned to Isabella, whispering furiously through gritted teeth. You said he didn't have anything. He wasn't supposed to, Isabella hissed. One by one, their masks slipped. The guests turned, not toward Dennis, but away from the hosts, away from the curated illusion. Some eyes held sympathy, others, disgust. But none were indifferent. Dennis didn't smile, he didn't gloat. He simply stepped back from the table, gave a small bow, and said, Merry Christmas. Then he left, not hurried, not chased, just free. As the door clicked behind him, the murmur of scandal replaced the jazz. Forks stopped moving. Conversations splintered. Inside, Isabella's kingdom cracked. Outside, Dennis exhaled into the cold December night. For the first time in years, he felt warm. 2 days after the Christmas Eve dinner, Valencia Circle was still vibrating with the aftershock. Isabella hadn't left the house. Cody's phone calls went unanswered. Catherine had pulled her children from the New Year's pageant due to emotional distress. But Dennis Flores? He walked through town with his head high. On New Year's morning, he stood quietly at the community center podium during the annual Voices of the Valley brunch, an event he once helped organize but hadn't been invited to in years. This time, he didn't wait for an invitation. He stood tall, wore a charcoal coat, no speech in hand, just truth. Some of you know me as a caretaker, others as a father. Some of you only know me through headlines or whispers. I'm not here to fix your memory. I'm here to correct the record. Silence settled. Even the servers froze in place. I gave most of my life to people who forgot how to say thank you. I paid bills no one acknowledged. I raised children who outgrew their decency, and I stood quietly while they repainted the past in colors I didn't recognize. He looked around, not with bitterness, but with clarity. But here's the thing. My worth doesn't need their permission. My sacrifices don't need their validation. I'm not just a supporting character in someone else's story. I'm the author of my own. There was no applause. Just something heavier. Recognition. Respect. Afterward, a few neighbors approached him. Old friends, old skeptics. People who had once distanced themselves out of social pressure. One woman placed a hand over his and said, I'm sorry I didn't know. We all should have known. He nodded once. It was enough. Later that evening, as the sun lowered over the last day of the year, Dennis sat on a bench by the town's oldest tree, the bench Maria used to call the thinking seat. Michael approached quietly, alone. He didn't sit at first, just stood, awkwardly, hands in his coat pockets. I read through everything, he said. I saw the receipts, the text messages, the will. Dennis didn't look up. Did you now? Michael finally sat, shoulders slumped. They told me you were just bitter, that you hated what we'd become. I thought you were stuck in the past. I was, Dennis said simply, but not anymore. Michael paused, then softer. I should have come to you myself. I should have asked. Dennis met his gaze, calm, clear. And now you have. Michael looked away. No excuses, no tears, just the slow, quiet weight of recognition settling between them. Dennis stood to leave. I'm not angry anymore, son. But I'm not waiting either. I gave you everything I had. From now on, I'm keeping what's left for myself." Michael's eyes welled, but Dennis didn't see them. He was already walking away, steady, unburdened, dignified. As the year came to a close, so did a chapter. Not with fanfare, but with freedom. Dennis had lost the illusion of family and gained the reality of self-respect. The house was still. No sounds of children thudding down hallways. No cautious footsteps of a wife checking in. No late-night calls from Michael asking for a loan, or Isabella demanding a ride. Just Dennis. And peace. He stood in the center of the living room, soft jazz humming from the old record player in the corner. Outside, snow fell like powdered silence. Inside, a single flame danced in the fireplace, slowly consuming the last remnants of a life he no longer owed to anyone. Receipts, old letters, even that front-page smear article, gone in the fire. Ashes, not regrets. He walked to the kitchen, unplugged the landline, and tucked it into a drawer. He deleted the family group chat from his phone, and with it, the performative holiday greetings that had never meant anything real. Dinner was just for him. Rosemary chicken, roasted potatoes, and a full glass of wine. No leftovers, no place settings for people who never came, no pretending. He sat by the window, warm plate in hand, watching the lights flicker across the neighbor's lawn, and for the first time in decades, the silence wasn't empty. It was whole. He wasn't waiting anymore, not to be seen, not to be thanked, not to be welcomed in. He belonged to himself, fully, finally. The clock chimed softly. Midnight. Dennis raised his glass to no one, smiling not because he had to, but because he could. "Merry Christmas to me," he whispered, taking a slow sip. "And I meant it.